The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tyler, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet.
Hello. Welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly watch along podcast. I am your host who knows very little about, books, TV shows, everything related to Wheel of Time. But I'm here with my faithful co-hosts to explore 2 episodes of Amazon's Wheel of Time television program. If you are somehow tuning in and aren't sure where we are, this would be episodes 5 and 6 of season 2 of the Wheel of Time. And as has been the custom this season, none of us have written down the names of those episodes.
Yep.
So it's just going to be episode 5 and 6. Joining me, as always, is Tyler, the person who's supposed to be better about writing things down than I am. Tyler, what's going on?
I never claimed to be better at writing things down than you. You are an English professor and I do math. Don't ask me to take the notes. That's a bad idea. I actually think you need to change the introduction a little bit more when we are talking about the television show as opposed to the books, because with the books, you are still at like 25% of the series that you've read. With the TV show, you have seen 75% as much television as I have in this season. It's a pretty impressive number. I think you've got to just give yourself credit for it.
I was going to call you out on that math, and then the last second you snuck in this
season.
You nailed it, just so I couldn't tease you about not knowing math after that.
87.5% if it's the other way.
It is true, and I will say, as listeners know, we try not to cross between the streams of reality here too much between the books and the show. But I will say, for some reason, I am going particularly cross-eyed watching these episodes and trying to figure out how they are or aren't related to the book we're currently reading. And in our most recent episode we recorded on the book, I was so confused if the thing we were reading had been revealed in the book for the first time or if that had come from the show. And so I'm doing my dang best, audience. Hey, Tyler, did we take 1/3 of our audience and turn them into a guest host this week?
Based on some of the analytics I've seen, it was actually about 1/8 of our audience that we took and turned into a guest host. We are once again joined by one of our wonderful friends who has agreed to show up and talk about the Wheel of Time with me, which is all I want from a friendship. This week, we have in the past brought on Ben to talk about like character and exposition. We've brought on my lovely wife to talk about martial arts and combat sports, which she does. And now we have decided in a week of trauma on the television show, we need to bring in a psychologist. Lindsay, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Really happy to join you both tonight. The irony, too, is that despite being technically a psychologist, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I'm not at all qualified to talk about trauma, but I'm going to do it anyway. But I am a social psychologist, and I study how people initiate and develop and maintain close relationships. I think about it and talk about it all day long, and there's certainly a lot of that going on in the episodes tonight. I also did my homework, and I can share that I think episode 5 is Damane, and episode 6 is Eyes Without Pity. So sorry to come here and immediately show up Tyler and Greg, but here
Well,
I
we're never
am.
having guests again. I need you to know this. This is the end of people being on this show. I must be the smartest one at all times. This is why I fail my best students. But Lindsay, wonderful to have you on the podcast. I actually just want to take a moment before we really dive into like the specifics of the episodes, just to kind of take the temperature on where people are at this point in the season. So I actually want to start with Greg, who hasn't seen the last two episodes, to give us kind of where are you kind of feeling about the quality of the show, you know, 3/4 of the way through the season. And then Lindsay, if you want to follow up, both responding to anything that Greg says, but also kind of how was your experience different the second time watching it as opposed to the first? Has your kind of opinion of these couple of episodes and how much you liked them changed in that time? But Greg, feel free to go first.
So setting aside what I already said about feeling the kind of multiple kind of versions of this story in my mind a little bit, I was struck particularly this time around that this show is expensive, right? Like this is a flashy, big budget affair, and particularly the costuming on the Sean Chan. I way back when we reviewed the pilot episode, I made fun of the computer graphics, but there's a lot going really well in these episodes,
Yeah.
and I was thinking a lot. I do enjoy the Doctor Strange movies, and I always think about how weird those actors look on set or must look on set when they're just waving their hands, entirely trusting the graphic artists to fill in something really cool, like some cool knot of a spell.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some of that going on here where they must have felt so foolish on set, just kind of making these crazy gestures and assuming the power would be filled in. But it looked cool and it totally worked. And on a television budget, I don't think that's anything to sneeze at. In terms of like the general arc of the show, these two were pretty dark, and certainly, not in a season full of laughs, but certainly they felt like a kind of, on it'd be 3/4 of the way around like the hero cycle, right? We're in like the deepest part of our character psyche. We're kind of understanding these deeper truths of who they are and what they believe in order to hopefully, I don't know, because I haven't seen the last two episodes, lead to some kind of triumph, lead to some kind of redemption of some kind. But this is the Empire Strikes Back of the season, at least as far as I've seen it. Lindsay, I didn't know you'd seen the last two already. I guess I should have assumed. Tyler likes to find guests that just make me feel left out still. But what did you think returning to these two episodes?
So completely agree with your assessment about the darkness of those two episodes. I think that rewatching them was actually a very different experience for me. I think in part because I don't do particularly well with suspense. I have always been someone who reads the last page of a book first, for example, and it's sort of how they get to that point. So that's something that worked really well for me in terms of watching the series as a whole, having read the books and then watching the series. I feel like I can appreciate aspects of each episode more than I might otherwise, because it's more like white knuckling it through the suspenseful moments with grim determination if I haven't seen an episode or don't know how it will happen. And I think particularly because, as you said, these two episodes were so dark. I think the second in particular was especially visceral, especially traumatic. I think I was able to take in aspects of the episodes that I hadn't previously upon a first watching. So there were small details that I picked up on that I hadn't noticed before that I appreciated. I think there were things that I revisited in a different light that worked better for me upon the first viewing. I think there were a few instances that actually worked less well for me as I viewed it a second time. So it was interesting to do a sort of compare contrast within my own experiences too.
I think where I end up then is actually somewhere in between the two of you. I think that I am taken aback and not a huge fan of how dark these episodes got, right? And I think the first time I watched them, if you had asked me if I was in Greg's position, if you were like, how are you feeling about this show? I think my response would have been like, I don't know if I like this season as much as the first, like because it is so dark and because it kind of felt Game of Thronesy is the way I want to describe it, just in the way that it kind of dwelled on the torture. But at the same time, I think I'm kind of like, I think because I know what comes next, because I've seen the last two episodes, I'm a little bit more on the second watch willing to say, like, okay, like I can watch through the fingers and it's okay, right? I know that things are going to turn out in a particular way. I will give no more spoilers than that. Greg, it could be completely different than whatever else. But yeah, I think that really changed how I viewed it. I think I would have been really afraid for the quality of the show overall if I had just seen 6 episodes, but knowing that it's at least like of a quality I didn't throw my like headset at the computer and cancel the podcast, like that gave me hope to some degree watching it for the second time.
I want to, these are now it's my unimportant complaints, but two quibbles I have. We are obviously talking about the thematic darkness. I want to complain about the literal darkness. I often was trying to watch these episodes, and if it was daylight in my house and coming in the windows, I could not watch them. I could not see a thing going on. And I know Game of Thrones had some episodes famously like that as well, but you know, and I don't know what that is in modern TV and movies. I was always told kind of around the time of the last Harry Potter movie that it was a way to kind of make the CG easier, as you put it all in the dark, and then you can kind of fudge the details of it. But I don't know if that's like they can make smaller sets if it's all dark, or I don't know. But I would complain about that. And my second one, which is really just pure old man, is like the runtimes kill me. Like I have not experienced many shows where you get a demonstrable rise in quality going from like 44 minutes to an hour and 4 minutes. And so I think in the comments we're making about the dark thematic elements, then sometimes I'm like, oh, and there's 40 more minutes of this remaining, or, you know, a solid half hour. And that feels a lot longer. And that's something I had a problem with the Rings of Power show on Amazon too. It's like, yeah, I really would like us to just kind of keep these on the shorter end. I think there's power for any storyteller to have to kind of work in a confine like that and edit things down a bit.
Lindsay, any last thoughts on kind of the overall arc of the 2 episodes before we start diving plot by plot?
I think I'm ready to go in plot by plot.
Okay, given our initial discussion, I think there is absolutely nowhere that we can start other than just by excising our collective demons around just how dark the Egwene plotline got, right? This is the anchor around these episodes. I think it's very well acted. I think, as you say, Lindsay, the second time around, there's a lot of little details that you can kind of catch in terms of why Rena is doing things exactly the way she is, but no matter how you slice it, this is just exhausting to watch, even though I think I can acknowledge the quality makes it perhaps worth it. Greg, what's your take on this plot overall?
It's like awesome. I just love it. Like I've watched it 4 times. No, it's horrifying and it's terrible. I will say I did really like the way the show chose to build the Dame is how they say it, or
Adom.
Adom. I remembered it was different than how we had said it in the relevant episodes of the book podcast, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was. But I liked how that effect was done and the way that was there. Just again in terms of general effects. But a complaint we had in the book is there is a time jump around that same time, and we didn't necessarily feel Egwene's trauma or how much of an effect this was going to have on her. I think the show probably, if anything, overcorrected for that, and by really, really making it visceral. And I agree with you. Really well acted. You know, I felt in all those moments that she was, you know, struggling to grab the pitcher, but couldn't grab the pitcher. That kind of training bit, and all of that is again crazy when you think about it's like two people in a room. And right, this is just me being like, guys, movies are magic. It's so cool. But like they, you know, the fact that it's just two people in a room pretending and they build the effects around that is really well done and really upsetting. I haven't always liked all the Sean Chan, but I did like this one, and you just said her name, but I've already forgotten it.
Rena.
Oh, Rena.
And he froze, maybe? Rena. Okay. I mean, nobody freezes. That never happens on Zoom. Don't worry, listeners. So I did think that she was the right kind of malevolent. There's like scream and yell and peel the paint off the wall malevolent, but the quiet, seething malevolence she brought to those scenes was really, really wonderful. Lindsay, what are your feelings on torture?
Definitely against. And actually, and to your point, um, Greg, I think that watching these particular scenes a second time, I think I had anticipated that I would, have some to some degree be not completely, but perhaps slightly desensitized. I actually think it was worse for me on the second watch because I had sort of the initial viewing, the reading as scaffolding, and then knew exactly how it was going to play out and just had to watch it unfold. And in fact, kind of funny and not so funny story, right after I finished that episode and I was still like drying my tears after watching the second episode, I get a text from my mom that's like, hey, can I borrow a picture from you this weekend? For the love of God, no, absolutely not. But in any case, and I think I agree with you that I think the actor who portrayed Rena, just her portrayal was heart-wrenching and sensitive and visceral and realistic. And I think a point that particularly stood out to me, and I hope it's okay that I'm jumping ahead, but it's toward the last 15 minutes of the second episode, where there's this moment where she actually makes Egwene burn down the tree that has brought her comfort throughout those two episodes. And we see her gazing, sort of gazing at it through the bars in her cell. It seems as if she gets sort of swept up and channeling with Rena, burns down that tree, and we see Rena's sort of elation from what she describes as this affinity, and then quickly transition to disappointment, frustration, anger, resentment that Egwene, you still can't pour her a glass of water from her perspective. And I'm getting chills as I just talk about it. So when I think about their relationship and Egwene's experiences, that's sort of a scene that I keep coming back to.
Yeah, I really liked that scene as contrast from something that we had kind of critiqued like a week and a half ago, one episode ago, when we had talked about Lanfear and Rand. And Lanfear kind of has this pitch to Rand about you can do whatever you want, you can be free. And we had both kind of said that didn't feel like it was the right pitch for Rand, right? He's not the person who is really all about power and being able to influence the world. And what kind of surprised me about the scene that you're describing, Lindsay, is that Rena gives almost the same pitch to Egwene, but it feels right, right? They've spent the entire season setting up her kind of jealousy about Nynaeve being more powerful. And so I thought seeing Rena kind of tap into that, even if she didn't entirely know why it was so effective, I thought that is really what kind of gave that scene like the emotional twist that really made it work. The other thing that I wanted to just quickly mention as we're kind of going around on this plot line is we had all mentioned just how kind of like visceral this was. And I had a question kind of lingering for myself, which is that because that's the only way you can do scenes like that in a visual medium? You kind of need to stay in them because you need to see the entire scene. Or is it like a deliberate choice you think that the show is making to try to make this a longer, more visceral, darker scene? Because I can't make up my mind about that, right? The book describes more or less the same events as this episode of the television show, but it doesn't feel quite as gut punch. And I'm not sure whether that's a choice on the part of the filmmakers or whether we think it's just a result of it being filmed and we kind of experience that differently. Do you have any hypothesis on that, Greg?
I mean, I think there's a base level of just seeing something like this is going to feel fundamentally different than reading a description of it, no matter how good the description is. When I teach things like this, I always, because it's been a relevant reference for like 20 years, I always mention Sarah McLachlan singing over the little puppies, right?
Yeah.
Because that kind of appeal to emotion where you're like, oh my God, the little puppy's got an eye that doesn't work right, and then they tell you you can save them for the price of a cup of coffee, and you're like, oh, I'm such a jerk, I bought coffee this morning, I could have saved the puppy with the broken eye. um and so I do think, the kind of baseline visual of seeing anybody get tortured means something very different to us, right? And the addition of having it be Egwene, who I think has been a very likable character in this series, and she has been promoted, as we've talked about since season one, kind of to be of equal status as the boys in a lot of ways. Or it was in the first season when she was kind of one of the potential Dragon Reborn. And I think that's kind of lingered on a little bit. And so to have her then be this like core person we've been with that long and one of our kind of great hopes for this world, I think that kind of hits extra hard. As well as just the fact, she's a young person and seems to not have seen a lot of the world, and so to get tortured in this way is horrific. But I think, and this is, I think, kind of answering your question, having so many scenes made me really think about, like, it made me think of a lot of other films that do something like this, right, where a character is being brainwashed or captive or something like that. And I think because it was in such a confined space and a kind of poorly defined space, all we were left with was her face and the noises she made and the way she moved her body. And that was really, really upsetting because we couldn't focus on anything else in that way. I'm just going to admit this clearly proven to be wrong. I thought the kind of other voice was going to be fake or like part of the training, not actually another Aes Sedai in the building.
Lindsay, do you want to pick up any other thoughts on this plot line before we move on?
So, I mean, I would just kind of second what Greg said in terms of the way that as a viewer, you're really forced to watch the extent to which she's tortured. And I think even though I think in a large part it's faithful to the way it was written in the book, I think there are aspects that for me as a reader that I couldn't visualize while I was reading that were brought to life, whether I wanted them to be or not. So, as Greg said, her sort of contorted body, her bloodshot eyes, sort of the bile that she's, spewing after the torture, right? These are all things that were not things that I had envisioned. Earlier when I pictured this story, but one thing that I kept returning to for comfort as a viewer and trying to self-soothe was something that Loyal said about Egwene earlier in the episode, and he said something along the lines like, "There's steel underneath that sweet exterior. If anyone can survive that place, it's her." So that's what I kept trying to remind myself of, and of course, it's even more devastating at the end of the final episode that we watched when she does indeed, pour the pitcher for Rhenna, and then Rhenna just dumps the glass right out.
I don't want to leave on that image, but I don't think there's any way to leave other than on that image. Good work breaking all of our listeners' hearts, Lindsay. Remember, that's why we bring guests on. I think what we want to what I want to transition to then is kind of the sister plot line to this one, right? If we see Egwene captured and then tortured, the kind of other side of that coin is Nynaeve and Elaine, who evade capture and then eventually team up with Rima of the Yellow Aja. And once again, this is big and devastating and sad. And interestingly, compared to the previous plot, in the previous one, as a book reader, we could all be like, okay, I knew this was coming. It's largely the same as what happens in the book. But Rima is put right front and center in a way that she just isn't previously. And so even as a book reader, I'm not entirely expecting kind of where this plot goes. And I found that to be kind of effective, right? I maybe knew the general outline of what was happening, but it still managed to surprise me. Greg, what was your thought on this plot overall?
I want to compliment the Rima actress a lot. It's really to appreciate kind of what happens in this plot line, and I thought that actress just nailed it, and the way she kind of pushed them as like a mentor to learn how to break open the device, all of that worked really well, and it was really gripping. And then when she has that kind of Aes Sedai unleashed moment, like I was pumping my fist. I was like, yes,
Yeah.
let's do it. And even though, again, you have a rough sense of where this is probably going, from the outset. It was still a really great sequence. And the way she delivered her sobbing heartbreak was just incredible. So, big fan of this. And again, it's funny because this plot line has really kind of jumped to the end of the book, like
Yeah.
halfway through the series, and then unpacked like the last bit of the book really more deeply than other adaptations we've seen as the series has gone on. And if you asked me as like the person planning the adaptation if that was a good idea, I would have been like, no, you got to build up to all this. But these moments have ended up making for real showstoppers. So the TLDR on that is, don't ask me how to adapt things. I don't know. So Lindsay, what did you think about this one?
Yeah, I agree with you. Not about the not asking you to adapt things, but about the just about it working really well. And I think in the short amount of time that Rima appeared in the episodes, I think that she was very well developed, and I feel like I could really get a sense of her as a person, as an Aes Sedai. And when Greg said, his response was, at one point was, okay, let's do this. I was thinking of, right at sort of the beginning of what turns out to be Rima and her warders, final battle, essentially, they sort of exchange, this tender moment where they look at each other and she winks at him, and then it's just on. And I just loved that. I feel like that sort of captured her spirit and who she is and the bond between them beautifully. I also, that was another scene that I think was extremely visceral, extremely challenging to watch, but I definitely had, because it was, I think, a choice that Rima and her warder were making, and it was deliberate. I think they themselves anticipated how it would end. I very much felt more like I was sort of cheering them on and invested in it in a different way.
Yeah, I think the moment that really made me love Rima more than any other that we had in this episode is when she's trying to get Nynaeve to channel along with her. And the way that she describes it, I feel like is the perfect yellow Aja way of kind of approaching it. It's when a patient comes to you, you don't think about healing them, you just heal them. And that seems to work for Nynaeve in a way that previous things hadn't. I thought that kind of really told us who that character was really succinctly. That moment I loved. I did have one moment that just drove the nitpicker in me crazy. When they are revealing to Rima that Liandrin is of the Black Aja, she says, "Did she break any of the oaths?" And Elaine says, "Yes, all of them," which isn't true. She broke the first oath because she lied, and she broke the third oath because she used the power as a weapon. But the second oath says that you shouldn't make a weapon for a man to kill a man. And that definitely isn't a thing that she did in the previous 4 episodes. So I'm just grumpy about that at like an etymological level, even though I know it's irrelevant to the actual plot of the show. Greg, bring us back to relevant topics about this plot line.
Well, I was trying to get a read on Elaine in a lot of these scenes because we haven't gotten that much of her yet. When we watched the first 2 of this season, which actually I think listeners heard us describe, but Lindsay has not, we ended up in a setting where we had some peanut gallery kind of cracking wise. But the peanut gallery were big fans of Elaine, and like, oh wow, Elaine's on screen. Ooh, I was like, oh, her, right? I was doing the Arrested Development, her. And I am still a little bit like her. Now, I did really like her line early in the first episode, I believe, where she said that she, like, Egwene is my friend. Like, why wouldn't I do this for my friend? And we are friends. And so I thought, to steal the line, Lindsay quoted, like, no, there's a little steal there, right? There's a little goodness there, a little heroism. But to your point, I mean, she just blatantly made up mistruths about Liandrin. That's going to get the whole deposition thrown out because those are inaccurate charges.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to get a read on her, and I find myself mostly not caring based on the peanut gallery that was present, is it just that she's a very pretty young actress and that was enough to win over the peanut gallery, or is there something still to come? I'm curious to see. Is Elaine standing out for you, Lindsay, without referencing the last two episodes?
Yeah, so I think well, I won't reference last two episodes. I will reference the books though, because I really do appreciate her as a character in the book. So that's why I was excited to see her appear in the TV series, because I like her in the books. I was excited to see her depicted in the series. And one dynamic that I did appreciate that I saw emerging over these two episodes is I feel like she is not intimidated by Nynaeve, and in fact does not have a problem standing up to her. I feel like, she's sort of, because Nynaeve is unable to channel at the time when they're when the two of them are escaping, she's able to sort of take the lead in using her powers to help them escape. When they're initially sort of shell-shocked, running, well, Nynaeve is attempting to run through the city, but making their way through the city. Elaine is, very straightforward and very forthright in directing Nynaeve about how to behave so that they avoid being spotted. So I liked, she, as Tyler said, she really stood up to Nynaeve in terms of saying, of course, I'm not gonna just leave on the next boat out of here because I'm the daughter heir. I'm gonna stay and, try to fight for and rescue my friend. So I appreciated those kind of series of little moments where I think, I guess, quoting Greg, quoting me, which feels narcissistic, quoting Loyal, I feel like there's, this sort of, she has this steely resolve, which I think kind of comes through in these small moments, primarily in her interactions with Nynaeve.
Yeah, and I think that really kind of sums up what this arc is doing. It's doing some really great character work, even though it's kind of like it's playing second fiddle to some degree to the Elaine section in Falme, or not the Elaine section, the Egwene section, just because of how kind of significant that feels. I now want to move us along to a set of plot lines that might not feel like they would group together ordinarily, but you all haven't experienced the late books in the Wheel of Time when the bad guy chapters are just a thing that you will occasionally get. I'd like to talk about the bad guy chapters in these episodes. So I am talking about Lanfear, Ishamael, Surath, and Liandrin. These are four characters that have a number of interactions with one another that don't include any of the main characters. I would just love to get kind of the temperature of the room on which of these characters are working for you. Are there any that you're kind of struggling with? Like, where are you feeling with all of the antagonists? Because we've got quite a few of them at this point in the series. Let's reverse the order. Lindsay, you can go first.
Okay, so I'll share something that did not stand out to me on a first viewing, but stood out to me on a second viewing, particularly the first of the two episodes with Lanfear. And one of the things that I hadn't noticed the first time I watched this episode, but had on a second time, was what I perceive as like the begrudging respect that Lanfear feels for Moiraine, which really surprised me. And perhaps it was something that both of you had picked up on, and I'm just a slower or less careful viewer. And it's particularly at the point when Moiraine and Rand are reunited, they're fleeing from Lanfear, and there's this moment where Moiraine, I think, in quite a utilitarian way, kills the remaining horse so that there's not one available to Lanfear to chase them with. And Lanfear sort of remarks, she sort of remarks like clever in this kind of like game recognized game quite way when she, or type way when she sees that. And then when she discovers the stable keeper, she says, oh, she's, more ruthless than I imagined, using you as bait. So there were these sort of interesting instances of Lanfear sort of remarking on Moiraine's strategies and seeming to show respect and appreciation for them, no matter how brutal, that I hadn't picked up on previously, and thought was interesting, both in terms of what they highlighted about Moiraine as a character, but also what they highlighted about Lanfear too.
I really like that point. I want to put that into the mix of, it's very clear from these episodes of the television show and things we've learned in the books, that so much of Rand and Lanfear's relationship is replaying from ancient times, right? From deep history, and we don't exactly know that relationship. And Ishamael kind of has some references as well in these chapters. Would you call them these episodes, the bad guy episodes, or vignettes in these episodes? So when you describe that kind of game recognizes game attitude, it makes me really think about how, like, well, Moraine should be new to them all as we understand Moraine, or I don't know if I have to make that collective. As I understand Moraine, that Moraine is not of that older time, is not I need to use my I statements while we have a relationship psychologist on the line. And so that's really curious. Is it so to put that valence on it, it's like, oh, it could just be she's more clever than I thought, but then it's like, how is that changing the pattern that we may have seen or Lanfear may expect? So Tyler, how is she changing the pattern? Go.
In innumerable ways, obviously. Honestly, I am really excited that the two of you are picking up on Lanfear Moraine kind of tension issues, kind of appreciation. I really jumped immediately to the Ishamael and Lanfear dyad, right? I thought that the scene of the two of them in Teleron Riode in the bed where they like conjure a fake Rand, that was just a lovely acted scene, like far as needs to be in as many things as we will allow him to. I just thought that that turned out exceptionally well. And it really raises, as you were saying, if we're thinking about kind of how are the antagonists being placed relative to the other plot lines, those two are characters who I think could very easily be viewed as like in lockstep and tandem. And it's very clear in that conversation how much they are still trying to figure out what the objectives of the others are. I thought that was kind of really fun to see that like lack of clarity from either of them on what the other one had intended. Any last thoughts? We're kind of in our second loop through. Lindsay, anything about these kind of dark characters that either stood out or were there any moments among them that you thought were most exciting?
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm with you, Tyler. I thought that sort of interaction between sorry, now I'm all self-conscious about being put on the spot, but in any case, and I'm doing so well with my podcast debut, but in any case, I would agree with that sort of interaction among Ishamael and Lanfear being really interesting, and I think really sort of highlighting the power struggle between them, and I think that was. Yeah, I think that was pretty compelling in terms, just sort of again, I think in terms of the fact that Lanfear, clearly will not be pushed around in the world of dreams is her domain, and I think she's doing what she can to sort of exert that power and authority and sort of demonstrate her skill there. So I did find that scene to be, I think, particularly compelling and effective in demonstrating that. But Greg, I want to hear your thoughts as well.
Well,
Like
one of the games that you one of the games you both know that I like to play is like figuring out the hierarchy of evil in the books and like what is the order we have to do here. And I thought some of the interactions between Lanfear and Ishamael really kind of put the structure into clear focus in ways that the books never did. And I'm not ready to say that it revealed something the books haven't revealed yet, because I don't know. Maybe it's a difference. But the kind of loose alliance, well, the fact that we're so clear this is Ishamael, I don't want to lose sight of, right? Like that's a big difference than the experience of reading this book for me at the time. And kind of this makes it very clear they are of similar rank, right? That they are both competing for the affinity of Baalzamon and we're getting more of that kind of politicking, infighting dynamic that we're starting to see in some of the other books we're reading later than this second book. So it's nice that we have that so early. I did also really like, I don't remember it in the books so clearly talking about how Lanfear is the master of Teleron Riode. And I like how you just said that, Lindsay. Like, she's like, this is my space. Like, I'm going to flick my wrist. I'm going to snap, interact, as the case may be. So I want to throw it back to you, Tyler, kind of your thoughts on them. But the one thing I want to pull out of my notes was I found it very striking that Ishamael referred to Rand as pet, right? That I did in a way I did not expect. Or sorry, not Rand. Sorry, Perrin.
Yeah.
Ooh, sorry, that deeply insulted Tyler.
That did hurt me deep down in my soul. Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about how these characters are particularly interacting with Perrin. I think both you're right to say Ishamael and call that out, but I think it's even Suroth has a line or two about Perrin in the first of the two episodes when they're talking about that character because they basically let him go at the end of the previous episode. He escaped. And I this is where I struggle with these scenes, not knowing how much is true and how much is boasting, right? We see so much back and forth between Ishamael and Lanfear in terms of who rules Teleron-Riode, who is going to follow the orders, who is more kind of in line with the Dark One. And it seems like I'm kind of left wondering how much of this, the more wolf you are, the more you're mine, how much of that is true and how much of it is him kind of almost laying the groundwork for a lie that he is telling to make people think he's more powerful than he actually is. Like I could see either of those potentially being the case. I don't want to spend too much time talking about all of the evil characters, but is there any last thoughts that either of you had on kind of these plots or the thoughts that are currently going around? Lindsay?
I'll just add that I think I'll highlight Leandrin because we haven't talked about her yet. I think she does bad so well. She makes it look so easy and so seamless. And I love when she returns to the tower and runs into Varen, who's asking about Egwene and Nynaeve. And Leandrin remarks that she's brought her back white asparagus that's only available in this particular region at this particular time. And it's the perfect alibi. So I appreciate the sort of kind of scheming and extent to which Leandrin thinks well on her feet and is just like largely unflappable. I think that that's, very nicely highlighted. And I also think sort of, since we were talking about the power struggle between Ishamael and Lanfear earlier, I also feel like it was interesting to see some parallels in the power struggle with Leandrin and Lady Suroth as well, where clearly they are not partners. Clearly there's tension. Clearly they don't see each other as equals. And I think there's a lot of posturing and power dynamics at play there too. But what were both of your thoughts?
Yeah, I am glad you brought up that scene because I thought that was great when she delivers the Egwene, Nynaeve, and Elaine. That was a fantastic kind of standoff. And I don't think it was that scene, but there was again to that question of the hierarchy of evil. There was a reference to like the Seanchan are gonna fight off the darkness when the time comes. Like that's part of what they're doing. And so to Tyler, to your comment a moment ago, I don't know if that is true, right? Like, I don't know if they really believe that or if that's part of how they are positioning themselves, right? It's that old cliche of screenwriting that you can't have your bad guys thinking they're the bad guys. They have to believe in what they're doing and making, motivations that make sense to that. And so I felt like, oh, that's really interesting. And what if it is, again, this is not revealing anything that we have read. What if it is eventually the end game is a union between these different powers against the Dark One, including the Seanchan? That would be very surprising to me based on what we've seen of them so far. I definitely had them on the opposite side of that.
Oh my
so
God.
I'm curious to see how it goes.
You guys, how have we never had my camera off on this podcast? I can actually react to your predictions as being right or wrong, and you don't know. It's the best.
Hey, not seeing your face is the best to me too. Wonderful. So I lost my train of thought, which is not a problem. But I will just say, I was gonna say Lindsay doesn't know how many shout outs the Leandrin's jawline got in our earlier episodes of season 2. So just one more shout out, just the craziest, most amazing jawline in Hollywood. Eat your heart out, literally every other actor.
Yep, I would completely agree with that. And I study relationship initiation, including what makes us perceive others as physically attractive, and her just bone structure, facial symmetry, amazing.
I am now going to move us off of this plot line because I am uncomfortable discussing it any further. The three next plot lines that we have all either only took place in one episode or were so brief across two that I'm not even going to let us do two laps. Each of us is going to get to say something about these plot lines, and then we are moving on. We are not going to spend a full 30 minutes on these three things. I want to begin with everyone's favorite samurai warder. Lan gets a solid 5 minutes of airtime across these two episodes. Do either of you have anything to say about his scenes? Because I'm not sure I do. Lindsay.
I mean, I really appreciate Lan as a character, both in the books and in the show. I do have to say that I don't think there were any particular sort of standout moments for, for me over the course of these two episodes, although I did appreciate this scene where sort of there's the tension between him and, oh gosh, now is it
Alana?
it's not Alana's warders. Alana, yeah, it is Alana's warders, where there's sort of this kind of shared theory of mind game among the four of them, where they all suspect and are sort of trying to figure out if each one is a dark friend. But
Yeah.
there weren't I don't think there were any other sort of particular standout moments for me, but I'm interested for Greg and Tyler what perhaps I missed something. Maybe there were standout moments for each of you.
Mine, I was just really excited about the cliffhanger. So where he and Rand are gonna face off, I was like, yes. An hour and 5 minutes in, I was like, let's do. Oh, come on. So I will tune in next week to the next episode of Wheel of Time. But I continue to struggle with Lan. I thought the character got such great material in season 1.
Yeah.
And in season 2, he's been kind of cut loose from all the things we would expect of him. And I wanted to see where that went, and it's at least at the moment feels kind of stalled, like they don't know where they want it to go. And I'm not giving up on it, because again, there's 2 more episodes and maybe they just had to kind of hold him to the side. But at least at the moment, I would say he was not particularly well served by this season yet. I look forward to seeing maybe that be proven wrong next. Now your camera's off. You're like smiling at how silly I am. I can tell. It's in your voice. All right, go ahead. What do you think, Tyler?
I'm actually smiling at how right I think you are. I think you're absolutely nailing it. I think the thing that stands out to me about the Lan section in these 2 episodes is that my favorite moment is actually an Alana moment, right? Her finding out that Moiraine and Lan have found Rand, I thought was really interesting and well acted, but that's what I've got. My favorite moment of the Lan section isn't a Lan moment, and that kind of tells us he's as you said, I think holding pattern is a good way to describe it. You know who isn't in a holding pattern? Verin. She is in detective mode, and I was kind of excited to see it happen. What was your take? I'm trying to find a way to make Detective Verin sound like Detective Pikachu, but I don't think I can do it without just saying the words. How were you enjoying this plotline, Lindsay?
Very much so. I especially appreciate the fact that although I was talking about how I personally found Liandrin to be convincing in her alibi, convincing in her return to the White Tower, about not being, about sort of not having a sense of where, what had happened to the girls, sharing news that she had heard on the road of, potential sort of attack that they might have experienced. I really appreciated how Verin was not phased at all. She was still suspicious, still doing her detective work, and I especially enjoyed the moment where she worked with one of her fellow Aes Sedai to sort of uncover sort of test her hypothesis and sort of uncover and find support for her hypothesis that that Sheriam had essentially, written about the girl's whereabouts in a logbook, perhaps under some sort of compulsion, for example. So yeah, it was a pleasure to watch her work. I just really enjoyed seeing her highlighted and seeing that she was not at all swayed by Liandrin's attempts to appear unsuspicious.
Co-sign everything Lindsay just said. My reference is not Detective Pikachu, but in Star Wars, in episode 2, Attack of the Clones, Tyler's favorite of the Star Wars movies, don't respond. Obi-Wan gets a whole detective plot line. And so I always have been referring to that as the detective Obi-Wan. So now I just want Varen and Ewan McGregor to go solve mysteries together and fly around the universe and find clues together. But yeah, I think the details we get are really fun and really interesting. And I think, Tyler, you've always had a soft spot for her, as I recall from maybe like 2 years ago reading a book together. No, last year reading this book together. So I think it seems like the show, you know, as I recall when Celine Song was talking about their approach to these, they just wanted to make sure that they had the right flavors of all the different characters as they built these seasons. And it seems to me like they've got the right flavor for Varen and will hopefully make her more and more of a presence as time goes on, as I assume we're going to see in the books based on like, Tyler's like, I love this character that's been in one chapter of one book. So I think there's more to come.
There's probably a little bit more to come. I like that idea of thinking about all of the characters as having a flavor, because what I was about to add is that it feels like all of the Aja are being really well kind of covered and you get a good flavor of them in this show, right? The red Aja, we have Leandrin kind of standing out for that like aggressive kind of stance. We get Rima with the yellow Aja kind of really emphasizing like healing and comforting in a way that we had described earlier. The first season does an excellent job of showing us the green Aja in their like battle worthy kind of like space. And then I really love this as a way of showing off what the brown Aja are interested in, right? They're the researchers, they're the academics. Giving one of them the Sherlock Holmes sort of place to be operating feels exactly right for that Aja. And I think this is a really good kind of quick sketch of what that group does really well. Varen's the best. We should talk about her all of the time. Unfortunately, we need to move on to a character who I also love, but somehow only gets like 2 minutes of screen time in this episode. Do you have literally anything to say about Matt and I guess adjacently Min in these 2 episodes? We're flipping the order again. Greg, Uno reverse.
Matt, what's going on with Matt? This character seems a little lost to me. You know, I still want him to be having his dagger plot, and the dagger actually came up. So I was like, wait, maybe we are doing the dagger plot. And then it was like, well, no, it still seems like the dagger plot's over. So the greeting scene between him and Rand was genuinely touching. That, you know, I think a show like this, and Game of Thrones struggled with it too, to show time passing. You don't necessarily know how long they've been off adventuring, and we've played that game a lot in the books trying to map that out. But I thought the actors did a good job of like showing the genuine joy of reuniting. So it's like whether they've been apart through a lot of time or just through a lot of events. You know, I thought it worked really well, and I liked that scene quite a bit, even if I don't really have anything else to say about Matt.
I definitely made note about that particular scene with Matt too, maybe because it was one of the few scenes that we saw him in over these two episodes. But it felt, you know, it was, I think it was just a very poignant scene when Matt and Rand were reunited. It was moving. You know, it was incredibly just sort of warm. I feel like you could, you know, get a sense of their care for one another. And then kind of the mirror image of that as well, which I found moving, but in quite a different way, is when Matt is sort of watching from the shadows while Rand waits for him so they can leave town together. And I thought that was, you know, just heart-wrenching and in quite a different way as well. So I kind of appreciated the way that that reunion and separation came full circle.
Yeah, I think in a couple of TV show episodes, we've referenced this idea that the show is doing an excellent job of that kind of thematic repetition where you see characters going through kind of similar things with very different emotions. And I think that's a really excellent example of that for Matt. We can then turn to another one of my favorite characters who in this episode freed another one of my favorite characters from a cage. Perrin and Avienda being on screen together is like all I ever needed about a Wheel of Time television show. So I can't be in any way objective about this. Greg, what was your take on this Perrin plot line, which I think more than any other, not to get too into the weeds on the book side of things, but this is almost entirely from book 3, not book 2. There's some odd kind of picking and choosing going on here. What did you think about this plot?
Yes, I am sometimes guilty of forgetting who the different Aiel are. But when this one appeared, I knew right away. I was like, hey, she shouldn't be here yet, and was excited about it. It's really interesting how often this show is using the someone is in a cage, I'm going to treat them like they're human and give them their basic dignity trope. Sure, we'll call it a trope because it has come up over and over again where one of the boys, it hasn't always been Perrin, right? Like,
No, it
or
was
what,
Matt in the
wasn't it
previous
Matt in the
season.
first
Yeah.
season? Yeah. So it's interesting that this has become a repeated device to show the kind of kindness of the main boys and how they fit into this world. But another fist pump moment, I loved when Perrin kind of puts himself in front of her and she just kind of laughs at him
Yeah.
and steps in front and then gets to do, essentially what we saw Rand's mother do in the first season of the television show, a kind of reminder that the Aiel are very, very skilled and powerful warriors. So not a huge amount of screen time, but fun to see this character now. And I think we're going to get to know, oh, I was about to spoil something from book 3, but that's dangerous to do right now because I don't think Lindsay's done book 3. So I will just say,
Oh.
Lindsay, how did you like these scenes?
Loved them. I think I actually just recently read the relevant chapter, so I'll be careful not to cross spoil. But thank you also, Greg, for trying not to spoil things for me as well. Yeah, so super excited to see Perrin, super excited to see Avienda. I'm looking at my notes now, and I just have Yas with like a bunch of S's like all over the Perrin and Avienda sections. And as you said, I just thought the fight seemed so beautifully choreographed and provided such, even though, it was a relatively brief scene, I thought it did an excellent job at providing a deeper look into Aiel culture. So Avienda's, she uses what comes to be or what we, learn as an important phrase where she says, my water is yours. She's, talking about the idea of dancing as fighting and just sort of beautifully choreographed. I was in just kind of fun aside when I was watching this, rewatching this particular episode. My partner was next to me eating something, and I turned to him and he had his just like spoon up to his mouth for like the whole duration of like the fight because it was just that compelling. And I also thought that I just loved the chemistry between the two of them. I like how Avienda appeared to be sort of teasing Perrin about potentially propositioning her after the fight, and it was just sort of a beautiful moment between the two of them. So excited to see both of them and really excited to see them interacting together.
Yeah, I really loved that scene. And I think there was a moment in there you were talking about how this scene and kind of in general Avienda in this episode really fleshes out the Aiel, kind of gives them some kind of cultural background a little bit, like Giato gets mentioned and a few other things. I just love there was one moment in the fight where Avienda does not have a weapon and she takes a sword from one of the White Cloaks and then throws it away rather than using it. And that Aiel refusal to use a sword is just, it's a really interesting little detail, but one that I think matters a lot in understanding that culture, or maybe it will for all of you in a book or two. I'm not entirely sure which crossing the streams, how we feel about this. Greg, what was your take on, we get kind of a little bit of Perrin and the Wolves here, as opposed to this is mostly Perrin and the Aiel or Perrin and the White Cloaks. How did you feel about kind of the balance between those three kind of areas of this plot line? It feels like there's a lot they could do, and they chose what to focus on interestingly.
Yeah, and maybe this is a discussion we were having earlier this week in an entirely different context, but it is interesting that when you're trying to make Perrin Wolfie in the books, you often talk about what he smells and have him experience things through smell, and there's just no way to do that really on the television show. Like, it would
Yeah.
look dorky if he paused in the middle of the fight and is just like, or whatever. So I imagine that that is kind of a challenge as a part of that. But I think because of that, the wolfiness, just looking at the broad arc of this show, it's like it didn't come in the first book. And I think we were all like, that's weird, or didn't come in the same way. We didn't get Elias and so on. And now it's here stronger here in the second season. And we're not, it's almost like it just had to kind of rear its head, and then they've put it back in the background because I think it is something difficult to show and difficult to make compelling on television.
Yeah,
Lindsay,
I would agree
oh, go
with.
ahead.
Oh, sorry, Tyler. I was just agreeing with Greg's point, and one of the things that I loved about the books was the way that wolf speak is so beautifully rendered and articulated. And I was thinking to myself, how will they adapt this for this series? And I mean, they do adapt it to some extent in terms of like the glowing image that Hopper shares with Perrin about about the cages and everything. But I think I had hoped for more, but at the same time don't know how it could be done more effectively. So I feel like I'm not especially justified in hoping for more if I don't know how I would, how I would like to, or have, any ideas about how it might be better rendered.
Yeah, I think that's a totally reasonable place to be. This feels like the opposite of the discussion we were having with Egwene, where it felt like there the book had options that weren't necessarily available. I guess it's not the opposite, it's the same thing, right? In terms of describing the wolfiness, we also have the book having options that just you physically can't do on television, and that I think really creates some interesting dilemmas. We have one last plot line. It needs to be talked about. It's Rand and Moraine. I found the most interesting thing here is the fact that we took what could have been a bland chase scene and decided that it needed to just be smashed together with Moraine's family drama. And I think that was the right choice, but also one that really complicates the way that this part of the story is being told. Greg, yay or nay on everything should involve a really kind of stuck-up nephew?
I will shout out my wife who wandered in at that particular moment and just was like, that guy's hair, huh? Really just completely broke me because he looked so ridiculous. And she literally had not seen a scene before that and did not see a scene after that. So that's the kind of presence he had. But that's actually like the smarmy nephew. Like, that's what you want, right? You want instantly to kind of dislike him. And yeah, it was. I'm very intrigued by the Moraine's got a family plot line and the ways in which the sister reveals that Moraine could be the queen. I got that right? That's could be true right now.
Could have been the queen, I think, is maybe better.
Could have been. Okay. And so where last episode we got the big reveal that she, has a family and has aged much slower than they have. The other piece of that being now that it's not just like a rich snobby family, but one that's very powerful potentially, right? In Carhane. So curious to learn more about that. Very interested in why that hasn't been really present in the books at all. And yet they felt that they wanted to get it here and be so prominent this fast in the TV show.
Yeah, I found myself wanting to know more about their family history as well, in terms of, as Greg and Tyler said, they, clearly are, part of an affluent, prestigious family. And in particular, when Moraine's sister is sort of making comparisons to their father's disposition, really, and their mother's disposition, it seemed like there were some complicated relationship dynamics at play. And I was, interested in what that might look like and if that will be revealed in time. I think in particular when Vera is talking about the sort of the goodness and kindness of their father, and then sort of seemingly as an insult, compares Moraine as being exactly like their mother. Also, interestingly, this just may be my own disposition to like everyone until they give me a reason not to. I did not have the reaction to Moraine's nephew that you both did. I mean, part of it might just be anyone who butters both sides of the bread to make a sandwich is like excellent in my book. So maybe that's what it was. I was like, oh, we like made sandwiches for Moraine as a little boy, and now like as an adult, he's making them to her and delivering them to her. So I don't know. I think there were elements of that character and that relationship that I found sort of heartwarming, but it might just be my own food drivenness and disposition to like most people.
I mean, I think you're right. I think that is just a lovely relationship, mostly because of butter, which makes everything better. I think my disdain for that character is primarily due to the fact that anytime he is on screen, we are not getting amazing scenes like Moraine's sister giving her the same childhood advice that she once gave, and Moraine realizing there's only one possible solution to all of my problems. Let's have Rand confront a horny, leather-bound Lanfear. I think if I don't call out that scene in particular, like Ben would be very mad at me. That is just a series of fascinating sequences that I need you to comment on, Greg.
I mean, I didn't find them all that great. Maybe I'm like worried about offending our friend's great crush, I guess is why I'm hesitating. But I mean, this fits with my pattern that they were in dreams, right? And so it's like, oh, dreams, here we go. And so I like the kind of what I understand to be a redefinition of Lanfear, that the only reason she didn't go bad the last time, or what kept her from really serving the Dark One, was her love of Lews Therin. And so the idea that there might be some good in her, unless I've misunderstood that, is compelling to me, and I'm interested to hear more about that. But like shirtless Rand strapped like Vitruvian man on some giant wheel, I don't know. I wasn't into it. That's not in my kink warehouse. So wheelhouse, not warehouse. Please, it's a very small house. It's
I'll just add that a direct quote from my notes is, Rand is strapped to giant sex whale while Lanfear wears demon lingerie, question mark. So yeah, so that sort of setup did not do much for me, but I did appreciate kind of the additional background about Lanfear. I think it made her more multifaceted, more nuanced in terms of her relationship with Lews Therin, in terms of her basically after that once having been love that was reciprocated, then turning into unrequited love, and then her turning to the dark, basically to try to reclaim that lost love. I found that to be interesting and compelling, and appreciated the way that was developed, even though I didn't think it needed that introduction to go in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Really interestingly, though, we've talked a good bit about Lanfear. We've talked a good bit about Moraine. I don't know if we've really hit on Rand a whole lot, right? To some degree, he feels like not the driving force in his own scenes. This is our last thoughts on this plotline moment. But Greg, any kind of last thoughts on Rand in particular, or anything else in these episodes that you want to call out before we call it a day?
I'm feeling like you felt about early Rand. It's like he's there, he's doing stuff. I do think he is just kind of a blank at the moment, and that's not dissimilar from him in this book in some ways. But am I correct that there was a shot that showed a portal stone, or am I making that up?
I think that
that up?
It felt Easter eggy to me. Like it existed, but it didn't feel like a major part of the plot.
But you're right. It didn't focus on it. It was like we've referenced, I think what you said is that it was a little more of an Easter egg, but it did look like it. And the portal stone is sticking out in my mind because it is our new show logo. And so I thought that was a little bit of a hint of like, the story of how we met Lanfear in the books may actually be related to how she came to this world in the show or what have you. So that in no way answers your questions, but in terms of last thoughts, that was one thing I had down that I was like, oh wait, like was that in the woods there? So you know, I'm in a place where I just want to know how this season wraps up. I will probably go push my wife and kids away from me and watch these 2 episodes tonight just so I can finally see the end, which I think means these were, you know, doing their job of getting us closer to the end, even if they weren't like the 2 best we've seen in the set. Lindsay, what are we missing about Rand or anything else that you want to say about these episodes?
Let's see. I mean, first I'll just add that my thoughts on Rand are very similar to both of yours. I think he felt just a lot less agentic in these 2 episodes. I think it was more about, I don't know, I think other characters sort of playing off of him, rather than, him kind of being the lead in his own story was how I saw it. I mean, we just talked about how he was used as bait essentially for Lanfear in the World of Dreams. I think in his interactions with Moiraine, that was used to provide information about how he had, rather than defeating the Dark One, had actually released Ishamael. So I think that I think he just, sort of felt like less of a protagonist essentially in these 2 episodes for me. But because so many of the other characters that I love were featured, I was actually okay with that. So including Hopper, which I just wanted to add, very excited to see Hopper featured. So not a particularly profound note for me to end on, but I feel I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge how excited I was to see him with Perrin.
I'm sorry, any mention of Hopper is 100% the most important note to end on. I just want to take a moment and say thank you, Lindsay, for joining us. We don't do a lot of guests, but when we do, it's really wonderful to get another perspective. And it was really great to just get a chance to hear from you today. I want to give you an opportunity to shout out anything that you would like to promote. If there's anything you would like to kind of tell the audience or, let us know. And then Greg, I'm going to make you do the outro because my internet is bad and that's your job now. So Lindsay, any last thoughts for the podcast?
Yeah, I'll just add that I really enjoyed chatting with you both about Wheel of Time, and thanks so much for inviting me. This was super fun.
Well, thank you. You are invited back, guaranteed for season 3. And if we someday figure out how to get our book readers to be guests on chapters without having to force them to jump way ahead in the book all of a sudden, you will be on the list of people we call, certainly. Faithful listeners, we hope you are enjoying this set of episodes that are reviewing season 3. As we record, we're not entirely sure when you're listening to them, but we hope they're either an excuse to go back and give these episodes another watch, or maybe they're helping you get pumped up for season 3 of the television program, which they have made no announcements about that I know of, because I don't go to the weird internet sites that Tyler spends all his time on.
Accurate.
But if I ever do, you will find me slowly going mad through the glass columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tyler Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend the show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.